This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we are back with another episode of the podcast about the dark side of creativity, Art of Darkness. I'm Kevin Kautzman, joined from the great state of Michigan by the one and only, the singular, the man with the axe, the man who's shopping at your door, Brad Kelly. Brad, how are you?
I'm doing good, Kevin. Yeah, you know, there's an axe features prominently in my Twitter profile. Has nothing to do with The Shining, really, but that's a good little coincidence. I'm doing great, Kevin. How are you?
I'm super, never better. I'm so excited for season 3 of Art of Darkness we have coming. You want to get to artofdarkpod.com. Click on the little button. There's a trailer Brad made. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming for Patreon. We've got the book club, so many cool things. And today, you probably already picked up on what we're going to talk about. This is a Darkroom episode with our friend Michael Nathanson. Hey, Michael, he is an actor, writer, producer, and now the host of the Playing Dead podcast. One of us.
Oh my God.
Welcome to Art of Darkness, Michael.
Thanks for letting me play dead with you guys.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Playing the dead space.
Yes, this is the Dead Space. And I just think it's so on brand for us. This is your podcast. The concept of your show is it feels like for us, we focus on the dark side of creativity and dead artists. And your pod has kind of a similarly dark theme. Do you want to tell people about it?
I would say we focus on the creativity of dead characters, of living artists creating dead characters. Excuse me. I got the idea when I was shooting The Punisher, knowing that I was going to die on this Marvel TV show. And I was like, well, how can I continue my journey through this world? And I love being a part of the MCU so much and getting to, go there every day and interact with these people. I would always show up at the Marvel offices just to hang out and, I don't know, take pictures. And I was just a fan, I was like, how can I continue this journey? And I had this idea, well, what if I just interviewed other actors who died in initially it was going to be Marvel stuff, and then it kind of has expanded to other properties and such. But that was the initial idea. It'd be fun to have sort of a inside conversation from someone who actually had the experience, because so many podcasts, when they interview actors about acting or about films or about process, becomes kind of like a sycophantic weird thing where it's someone's a fan and they're just trying to they're asking the same sort of rote questions that come up all the time in these interviews. And I was like, well, I feel like I have a different platform from which to speak, which is the experience platform, and having my own resume and training and all that. And so it just evolved. And ultimately we ended up doing it with Lionsgate, Lionsgate Sound, which is the new division of Lionsgate, which is basically their new podcast studio and creating their own IP in that space. And we're one of the first podcasts on there. And we came out 3 weeks ago. I want to say we came out I think it was the last week of November was our first episode. And in our first week, we got top pick podcast in The Guardian, which was really cool. And they wrote a really nice little review of us, which was great. And we've gotten some good press. We are 4 episodes in. I think our 4th episode just came out this past week. They get released every Tuesday. And you can get it on Apple and Spotify. If you just search for Playing Dead, it usually comes up. And it's been a gas. I got to be a guest at LA Comic-Con last weekend.
Cool.
Where we did sort of a coming out party, as it were, for the podcast. It had just been released that week, and we did sort of a live show, and we had Keith David on stage with us, which was awesome. Keith David from Nope and They Live, and
They live.
The Thing, and he's died in so many great things. Dr.
Cool.
Facilier and Prince and the Frog, and the guy's had some,
one of the great
deaths.
one of the great dyers in Hollywood.
Oh,
really.
he's amazing, and that voice of his is so beautiful. And he is the most beautiful, generous soul. He was very kind to come and do this, and we had a great time. We wrote eulogies for some of his characters, and he read them on stage set to music, and it was just a rad show we had there. And so, hoping to do more live shows of the podcast with some cool guests at different cons, and maybe, sort of we've got some things in the works, hopefully. But for now, it's a sit back and relax and wait for Tuesdays to come out, where we have different guests come on. And each episode focuses on a different sort of property. So like there'll be an episode about Stranger Things, and there'll be an episode about, Stranger Thing deaths. And one was about sort of horror movie deaths. And one is about child actor deaths, not child actors who died, but children who had to play out famous deaths in cinema. And so for that one, we had Rufio, Dante Bosco, Rufio and Hook, and then we had Noah Hathaway, who played Atreyu in Neverending Story, and then we also had Paula Rhodes, who's a really big video game voiceover actor, and she voices like all the Silent Hill or Resident Evil, all that stuff. She's always playing like famous kids that like will kill you or that you can kill in video games. Nice. And she talked all about like, deaths in how to play deaths in video games as a motion capture voiceover artist. It was really cool. And and each of those episodes is sort of like that weird journey with all these different people in terms of their career and giving personal insights in terms of their process. And you get to hear a lot of like cool inside stories that I think they haven't told before. And I think there's something about feeling comfortable with me as an actor. I would say the majority of them know who I am going in. But, it's like, I think they understand that there's a shorthand there. So it kind of cuts the chase really quickly. So it's, again, not those sort of rote questions about career and, what is it like to work with a famous director and things like that.
Right. You're not an entertainment reporter or something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's not an E channel. Exactly. And I'm not on a red carpet trying to get them to say nice things about whatever whatever the studio wants them to say. And it's been cool, and it's very unfiltered and uncensored. And the episodes have led to some pretty intense personal conversations, and about not just about their about their lives, about process, about their history of their careers and where they are now. And a lot of them have left the acting world, but still have these sort of iconic roles and deaths that they played, and still go to cons to sign stuff or still get stopped on the street. And and that's the thing about, especially when you die as like a famous character, there's something about that kind of stays with the public consciousness forever, and kind of ingrains you into like the psyche of fandom in a way that's very unusual. And so, hoping to do a season 2, hoping to get to some TV deaths. That would be really cool. We have I have a lot of thoughts about where to keep this going, but it's the kind of thing that just can keep going forever.
100%.
How many people have died in cool ways? And
right. And
everybody always has an idea. Everyone's always like, what you should do. And so I get that all the time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we get that. That's one of the ways we knew this pod was going to have a life, when people started peppering us with requests and you should do this. So that's really cool. Yeah, I hope your podcast has a great long life. And at the risk of asking one of those cliche questions, I think this has a little more nuance than some.
No, there was no there was no judgment on anybody else.
No.
And it's not what you guys.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
it's just side of the street.
Yeah, I just wanted to give actors a chance to kind of express themselves in a more nuanced way, and I think that's maybe what I was.
Yeah, and there's a big difference in talking to somebody about the thing that they did and talking to them when they're in the midst of a promo run too. I would think, right? It's like, this thing's already out. We're kind of reflecting.
Nobody came on to promote anything. It wasn't about I'm coming on your podcast because I want to promote X. It was literally. Half of them were friends of mine, and half of them were just people I admired and loved, and we were able to get because they were curious and interested in having a real conversation. And so, hopefully it comes across.
Very different vibe.
The point that I wanted to make, which kind of dovetails into a question, and I think you addressed it on your first episode, but it's a case of the stakes being extraordinarily high, not only in the scene and in the context of a series. Let's say if you die in a television series, you're out of work for the moment. Right. I mean, it's extremely, there aren't many other careers where you simultaneously get to have this highlight moment an on-screen death that everybody's going to talk about at the water cooler, and then also you're working with your agent, I assume, to line up the next thing.
Right.
I mean, look, in my case, I knew I was going to die from before I got the job, so I wasn't like a big surprise. I've told the story in my podcast, and I think I've told it before, but here comes my wife with a delicious
cup of coffee.
Look at
yes,
that.
Very good. Very good.
On camera.
Hello.
Smile.
All right.
She's borrowed my Nakatomi Christmas sweater. I don't know if you saw
Oh,
it.
yes.
Nice.
All right.
Nakatomi Christmas party sweater. It's pretty rad.
My second favorite Christmas movie, only second to Eyes Wide Shut, which we are doing an Eyes Wide Shut.
You're calling that a Christmas movie?
Yeah, of course. It is a Christmas movie, isn't it?
Once people decide,
we can get into that in a second. I want to talk
movie.
to you guys about Eyes Wide Shut for a second before we launch into
okay.
Well, all right. Sorry. Before I was interrupted, tell me what the hell I was talking about.
We were talking about this whole phenomenon of dying in
dying in a thing.
And you
luckily I knew but I was saying, I told the story before, but like nobody else in the cast knew I was going to die. And it came as a really big shock to a lot of people because I was the first series regular who died. And I remember coming to the read through of that episode, and we had the showrunner and all the big executives there, and then more executives from Marvel on the TV screen and Netflix and everybody. And we got to the end of the episode, and like it reads my death scene, and I stood up and I was like, what the fuck? And everybody just froze, like thinking that nobody had told me. And then I let it hang for a second, and I was like, just kidding, I knew. And everyone was hysterical. But I got them, man. I pranked them hard, all the other actors.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There was that moment where they were all just like, that poor bastard. But I mean, look, it happens, it definitely happens mid-season or mid-show, or it's different in a movie where it's like, you're going to die in a movie, right? Or unless it's a franchise and you're hoping to get into multiple sequels or whatever. But, I would say for the most part, actors know when they're going to die in something. And it doesn't make the sting of that any less. Like, especially, in my case, even knowing before I started, I'm deep into the season and filming and getting to know these people and like coming to work and like, it's like, oh, look, there's the battle van. There's Frank's thing. There's this, there's that. And it's so cool. And then you realize, oh, wait, my last episode is coming and then I'm done.
Right.
So it doesn't make it sting less, but there is something to be said for getting out when the getting out's good too, like when something is cool and people are watching it and you have this like, I wouldn't want to go out in a shitty way. Like I went out in a pretty baller way, I think, in terms of a Marvel character, but
it was great. And I mean, the Punisher, that season of Punisher is one of my favorite things that has come out of the MCU. And one thing about it, I mean, your death with, I've watched other shows where a character dies and sometimes you can feel it in the episode. You're like, why are we all of a sudden paying all this attention to this guy? Oh, that's because like Walking Dead or something. So it's like, because he's about
they always tip their hand on Walking Dead that like that character's finally getting an episode and just
Yeah, but that was not the case of the Punisher. Like that came out.
People were surprised. People seemed surprised. Although it's funny when you talk about it because it's like it's the fucking Punisher. Like everyone dies. Like there were 3 series regulars left, I think, at the end of the first season. So, but no, I'm really proud of being in that season of television. I think they finally did the Punisher right. I think John is amazing, and that whole the universe they created where they were like really real human stories, and it was a nice mix of like comedy and drama. And I think it was, for my money, one of the best things that's come out of Marvel TV or movies. And so I'm proud to be a part of it. And, I could get resurrected somewhere somehow. I could play another character. You could put me under heavy makeup. I could show up somewhere else, right? No one's called me, but I'm waiting for DC to call me and be in the next Batman movie. That's what I really want to do.
All right,
you
put
go.
it out there.
All
right,
I'm a Batman fan.
Yeah.
I don't have like this super allegiance to Marvel or DC, but my favorite thing in the whole world, comic book wise and character wise, if we're talking about that world, is Batman. And so I crave it.
Well, there's always going to be another Batman movie on the way, like forever.
Right.
So there's always a chance, right? It's never over.
That is eternal.
And by the way, look at Henry Cavill, by the way, or Cavill, or whatever how to pronounce his name. That poor guy. I mean, you could reach the guy's fucking Superman. He leaves a hit show to go play Superman again, and then they're like, "Oh, just kidding."
Yeah, nah, we're not gonna forget it.
It never gets, but that's the point, right? It's like as an actor, you have zero control, and you never know exactly. There's no safe space to play as an actor in this industry.
Well, that's true, right? Even if your character doesn't get offed, I mean, if it's a TV show, you never know if it's coming. You never really know if it's coming back, and even if it is coming back, it's okay. We get a season out of it. Is that, how long? Do we get another season after that? Nobody knows, right? So it's always pretty uncertain.
That's why I think you always have to just be so grateful for anything you get in this business. Whether it's like getting, you guys getting to do this podcast, like it's so nice, to have a successful podcast, like awesome. And just to have anyone listen or watch anything you do in the world without the amount of content that's out there, you've already won. So like you have to you just have to like have a sense of, and I think Henry probably does, because he's like, he's probably way richer than any of us combined. He's done very well for himself. He will have more jobs and more series and more things, but
he's also as handsome. He's also as handsome as a person can be.
Yeah, I know. Fuck that guy. He should be knocked down a pedestal. You're right. I'm glad they did that to
him. Making friends in high places in the industry.
Yeah, no, he seems like a nice fella.
He really does.
Yeah. Wait, going back to why Eyes Wide Shut is a Christmas movie.
Okay, right. Very good. Yeah, we're here to talk about Kubrick, especially The Shining. We have an Eyes Wide Shut watch party coming up later this month. I believe on the 27th. You can find details at artofdarkpod.com. Yes.
Yeah.
Go.
Why is it a Christmas movie? I think
we don't have to spend. I don't want to spend so much time. It's a huge tangent, but just give me give me just because it like takes place kind of over the holidays.
It is obviously a Christmas movie. It happens during Christmas. It ends. The final image you're left with is the daughter going missing in a little toy store. The lights and the lighting of the film are totally informed by the palette.
The daughter going missing.
Yeah, you're not familiar with that little nugget in Eyes Wide Shut, Brad?
No.
I missed that detail.
Oh, well, that's something that you could probably look up. There are two men who are at the party earlier, the party where the prostitute overdoses, the big party at the beginning, not the party later. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And
you played a tomato. You wouldn't sit down.
What's her name? Mandy. Mandy, you're gonna need treatment.
Right.
You're going to need help. In any case, there are two men, and you can look this up. There are two men who are sitting in frame at the center of the frame, right at the bottom of the sort of large stairwell, and they're in suits and ties, and they sort of look formal and a little ominous, and they are in the toy store later. And when the final line is delivered, they've lost track of their little girl. So that's one of the little eggs in.
So what's the idea that they've kidnapped their daughter?
Possibly.
Yeah. For what purpose at this point, though?
Well, because of what he's seen.
Yeah.
This is a theory.
Yeah.
Wait, but what would be the end game? I'm just thinking plot wise. What would be the end game for them? Because they've already basically threatened him, and he knows that. So what? They're going to kidnap the daughter, be like, "See, we can get to you. Like, you really better." Like, to reinforce the fact that you better shut the fuck up and not speak about it.
I think that's the implication, and then it also thematically aligns with the father in the costume store who has essentially pimped out his daughter for prostitution. It's extraordinarily dark. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not the only person to notice this or point this out. So
I'm sure that's there. I don't know if that makes it a Christmas movie.
I'm like, wait a second. You didn't answer that question. Really?
The palette of the film. When he goes to see the street prostitute, he walks into
She's got Christmas lights in her bedroom.
They've got the really lame Christmas tree right in the living room. Maid's Day Off. I mean, it is a movie that happens at Christmas. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I got to be honest. Can I just say about Eyes Wide Shut? And I'm sure
you're
not the first one to say this. I mean, look, I'm a Stanley Kubrick fanatic. I love it so much. And I've tried to watch Eyes Wide Shut so many times, giving it like years between viewings, just to think like, maybe if I come back to it 5 years later or 2 years later or 6 months later, I'll have a different perspective based on my life experience. And I'll be able to somehow connect with this movie. I watched it again maybe earlier this year. To me, it still like just sucks. And I hate it. And I find it unwatchable. Now, one of the main reasons I find it unwatchable, and there are scenes I like about, like, there are cool scenes in it. Don't get me wrong. It's not just like completely unwatchable to me. It's Tom Cruise, because I just find Tom Cruise at this point unwatchable because he's just such a fucking kook and all his nonsense. I just can't. So it's not like he's aged well for me. I mean, the guy's aged well. He looks amazing, but not for me.
That makes it even better for me. I just love it.
Maybe that may be for you, but I just every single time I'm watching, I'm like, I'd rather be watching any other fucking Stanley Kubrick movie. Every time.
Man.
And it happens about halfway through, and I'm just like, I want to understand. And I think maybe part of that is he didn't finish it. That wasn't his final cut. He didn't sign off on that cut. Maybe that thing would have germinated for another 5 years, like all the other movies, and like he would have cut it 8 million ways. Or maybe he would have just been like, fuck this, I made a shit movie, I'm not going to release it. I can see him doing that too. But I think that's, to me, is like the linchpin for my taste is like, well, he didn't sign off on it, so I'm not signing off on it.
Right.
That's just my time. And I know people who are very smart and lovely and brilliant who love it. So I'm not denigrating it in that way.
Sure. Yeah, it's just difference of opinion, difference of taste, or whatever. It hits you different. It's not a big. I mean, it's not my favorite. Awesome. It's not my favorite Kubrick film by any means. I like it, but it doesn't even really rank in the top 3 or 5, maybe. But
I feel so alienated right now. I love this. I love this movie so much. But we're here to talk principally about The Shining. I want to tease. That's one that you're here to talk about today on this Dark Room. We are going to do an additional 20 or 30 minutes after this episode for Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. If you get in now, it's $3. On January 1st, it goes up to $5. If you get in now, you're grandfathered in. Give yourself a Christmas present.
Totally. And I might and maybe I'll take my sweater off.
See, this guy is in show business.
He's
in
show business. Yeah,
you guys want a bump in that extra piece of that episode.
That's right. We're gonna get the Nathanson bump.
But hair got very long, but you can't see it yet.
Yeah. Okay. Seriously, on this After Dark, I'm gonna go deeper into that little Easter egg on Eyes Wide Shut because I hinted at it. I found a link. We're also going to talk about Tarantino's mixed opinion of Stanley Kubrick. And then we're going to go a little further into an article I found about the making of The Shining, particularly about the kind of cruel and maybe unnecessary things that Stanley
drove Shelley Duvall to insanity, essentially.
Right.
Correct. Yeah. So if you want to hear that extra 20 or 30 minutes, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. All right. So Michael, you light up when we say The Shining, and that's what you kind of wanted to talk about. So let's get into it. I mean, is there a better horror movie? Is there a better movie?
It's such a funny, people look at that movie, I think sometimes as his sort of studio film, quote unquote, or his most sort of polished studio version of a film. And I think the only reason people say that, or two reasons, because it's got Jack Nicholson and because it's based on a Stephen King book. But it is not Stephen King's book at all. It is Stanley Kubrick's vision and inspiration. And it's obviously, and I think all of his movies are on some level autobiographical. Certainly the ones starting with like 2001 and as those his more spectacle movies, and I think those were his sort of inward journeys he was taking about his own sense of humanity and connection to the world. And because I've seen all those documentaries, and you hear Leon Vitali talking about him and his whole kind of he had kind of a mental breakdown at the end of his life. He kind of became a Howard Hughes-ish style figure, but that started a long time ago, and it's that sort of quest for maybe connection to humanity within himself, and also that quest for perfectionism that can drive some artists insane. But you see it in no other movie he ever made do you see that OCD perfectionism, artistic vision to the like minutest detail than in The Shining. And so like I don't think there's a better movie that's ever been made in terms of composition of frame, suspense, the way the use of sound design, production design. I mean, it's if you want to talk about like a living work of art, and it's done, I think, in a very sly pop culture way. I think he like wraps all of that up in this sort of like, oh, it's a jump scare horror movie based on a Stephen King book, but it is such a psychologically twisted journey of sight and sound that just is unparalleled. And it's not a movie, it's an experience. It really is. Like, it's an experience. You can't compare it to like other, like when people say, is it the best horror movie or it's a great horror movie? It's a great it's a great everything movie. It's got everything in it, but you can't. I hate classifying it as anything other than a work of art.
Well, it's like
fair.
a puzzle.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. I love when we have guests on who need no hand holding. Outstanding. Well, axe swing. Ha. It's also a puzzle. It's the movie itself, the film itself is a haunted house. And of course the documentary Room 237 is, if you're not familiar with it, and I'm sure you've seen it, Michael, but it's just such an outstanding example where you can watch this movie, and you can watch this movie 30 times, and there's always something new to see, and there's always something uncanny or strange. It's a real, truly rare achievement, and fun to watch. It's just fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. I watched it over, I think I was telling Kevin this, but I watched it over Thanksgiving. I happened to be separated from my family, not in life or great. Over Thanksgiving, I was filming something in New York, and it just so happened I got separated from the family. They were still in California, and I ended up spending Thanksgiving just with my parents. And they have this house in like sort of in the woods, and it was really creepy. And I just decided to watch The Shining one night, and they both sort of like migrated to the couch and were like, "Oh, you're watching The Shining?" And they had some like idea that they had seen it once on TV many years ago. But my parents, who are getting up there and not necessarily the audience for that movie, sat and watched the entire movie with me, like got drawn in the way I got drawn in. And by the end of it, and they were silent and they watched the whole thing and they were like, "I don't remember it being that good." And it's funny to me that I think a lot of people, I think like what we're kind of like throwing out there a minute ago, is that like a lot of people have an idea of what The Shining is, and they've seen it at a certain point in their lives, and it's not a movie that a lot of people will go back to a lot because they have it's creepy and it's weird and it's scary, and it's not fit for every occasion. But when you do go back to it at like a later point in your life, if you weren't like a devotee of it, like I mean, I've been obsessed with it since I was a kid, but for those people who kind of like go back to it, you find new things and new ways to sort of clue in and understand what's going on. And I don't know, it's a mind fuck, but in a delightful way.
Well, and it's a case of like, if you saw Blade Runner or Alien on VHS on a tube television in 1993, and then now you've got your ultra high def, it's a different movie.
I think my parents saw The Shining on like, Betamax in 1982. I don't think my parents went to see that on a movie screen, and now they have this gigantic television, 4K television, and it's like, whoa, Nelly, look at those colors and look at the
there's a lot of detail.
And the Kubrick estate is famously particular. No print makes its way to digital without frame by frame colorizing and whatever else they do. That's very, very famous. You have to indulge me. I have two quick like family stories about The Shining that I want to share too. For my family, it's almost like a coming of age ritual. My mother, I grew up in North Dakota, and we would have blizzards. It would be serious snow, and we'd have school days, and we would go to the video store. Right? Let's go to the video store. And I must have been 11 years old, and my mother bundled me up, sent me to the video store to bring home The Shining to watch. And she was a little uncomfortable. I was a little uncomfortable, but there was also a moment of like, it's really important that you see this movie. Wow. And I did something. I didn't send my daughter into a blizzard, but when she
maybe
was 13,
you come back, maybe you don't.
Right? It's almost like our little. It's a coming of age thing for us. It's like it's time. You're 13, and I showed it to my daughter, and she watched it wrapped like your folks, and a little beat passed when it ended, and the first thing she said was, "What happened?" And I looked to her and I said,
it leaves you in that sense of bewilderment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey. It's a journey that you take. I said it's an experience.
Well, and I told her, I said, I've watched this movie 30 times. I'm asking the same question still. Yeah. That's the joy. It's a rare thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who is the caretaker?
Right. Well, I have an interesting article. This is from Screen Rant. This might be a little food for discussion, but This is an article saying I love that this movie gets this level of detail. People pick over this movie frame by frame. Every time Jack sees or interacts with a ghost from the hotel, there is a mirror in the scene. For example, when he encounters the woman in room 237 and later during his conversation with Grady in the red bathroom, with the only exception being the one scene where he can't see the ghost, when Jack is locked up in the kitchen pantry and Grady talks to him from the other side of the door. This, as suggested by many, indicates that the ghosts in the Overlook Hotel are not real, and instead they are a reflection of Jack's broken psyche. This would put an end to the endless discussion on whether the ghosts were real or not, but there are other scenes that contradict this idea. Every time Danny saw the Grady twins, there were no mirrors around, but that could be his shining, right? Same toward the end of the movie where Wendy begins to see ghosts too. Anyway, just a little detail.
Wrong. That's wrong. 100% wrong. The ghosts are real.
Right.
You have to. I think Kubrick himself would say if he were here, if you see it, it's real. Like I don't think Kubrick was someone who put something on screen as, sure, there are metaphors going on and themes and all sorts of stuff going on in every movie, and his movies are chock full of wonderful, wonderful stuff like that. But he is a visual artist. And I think the visual medium of film to him was, this is realer than real. This is really what's going on. That's just my feeling from like reading stuff that he's written and stuff that people talking about it. I just think that he cared so much about the visual artistry of it to kind of like say that.
I think there's certainly I mean, if you got to say the ghosts in the movie are real or not, I think they certainly are. I mean, I think the final conclusion whether something is supernatural about what's happening versus just being Jack's psychosis is that shot of the film, the party poster, the photo of the party from what year did the party
1921.
happen? 1921. Boom. Yeah. I think that to me seals it, that there's something, not that I can explain all the ins and outs of the sort of the rules of the supernatural phenomena, but that there is some kind of time ghost thing happening. Almost definitely.
There's all the Minotaur business, the idea that the hotel is a maze, the film itself is a maze.
Yeah. It's inspired. So I know thinking about The Shining, the book, and thinking about Shining, the movie, it's almost not all that relevant to compare them, but Stephen King was inspired by a actual place and apparently wrote most of it in something called the Stanley Hotel, which is a real place that you can go to now and visit, and there are stories about ghost hauntings and all kinds of things. I got kind of loaded there at the Stanley Hotel bar a few years back, and
where is that
wandered the grounds looking for ghosts. What is the name of that town? It's right outside of Estes Park. The town might be Estes Park.
I can look it up.
Yeah. It's an old hotel.
Estes Park, Colorado.
Yeah.
It's in Colorado. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful old hotel. And they
wait, is that a coincidence that it was called the Stanley Hotel? Are there any coincidences left?
No.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Probably not.
Well, of course, I wanted to correct something that I said on the core episode too, because we were still getting our sea legs for Art of Darkness, and every statement we make isn't God's truth. But I said something like he didn't write the screenplays. What I really meant was he always worked from source material. So obviously The Shining is he would work on the screenplays with collaborators, in this case, Diane Johnson, who I actually met in Tennessee at a writer's conference. And cool. She just waved it off. I'm sure she was sick of talking about it. She just said it was all Kubrick. It was all the master, blah, blah, blah. Didn't want to talk about it. And I certainly don't blame her. I'm sure she's just sick of it. But I have some interesting facts here about The Shining. This is from Mental Floss. The Shining was inspired by an episode of Omnibus. In 1952, Kubrick worked as the second unit director on one episode of the television series Omnibus, but it was a different episode about poker players getting into a fight that inspired parts of The Shining. And this is quoting Kubrick himself. You think the point of the story is that his death was inevitable because a paranoid poker player would ultimately get involved in a fatal gunfight, he said of this particular episode. But in the end, you find out that the man he accused was actually cheating him. I think The Shining uses a similar kind of psychological misdirection to forestall the realization that the supernatural events are actually happening. So that confirms your statements just a few minutes ago, Michael. They're actually happening.
Interesting.
I've got another little factoid. Stanley Kubrick didn't even read the screenplay that Stephen King wrote for The Shining. According to David Hughes, one of Kubrick's biographers, Stephen King wrote an entire draft of a screenplay for The Shining. However, Kubrick didn't even deem it worthy of a glance, which sort of makes sense when you consider that the director once described King's writing weak. Instead, Kubrick worked with Diane Johnson on the screenplay because he was a fan of her book, The Shadow Knows. The two ended up spending 11 weeks working on the script. Fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting that he wouldn't even look at the script. It makes you wonder, did he even read the novel? Right? Because you wouldn't have to read the novel. Somebody could just explain to you the gist, the outline, what happens and what's going on, and you could just go from there, right?
Well, the novel's about Stephen King's own sort of journey of writer's block and also alcoholism, right? And sort of that whole disease of alcoholism. That's really what and it's about sort of inherited abuse and abuse through the ages and generations, and how through alcoholism and other sort of mental illness you can pass on this like abusive behavior, and it just like and Danny in some ways trying to break that vicious cycle of abuse. But you know, that book is very different from the movie. I mean, just in terms of, you know, I don't think Kubrick ever met a novel he didn't like to completely destroy and make his own, you know. Although I think Burgess liked the adaptation of Clockwork Orange.
I believe he did. The problem, one of the things with Burgess is Burgess didn't really like his book. I mean, it's like his least favorite of his own book.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking too. Yeah, it was like, sure, it was a good adaptation, but like I don't care.
Right.
Yeah,
Burgess was hammered when he wrote A Clockwork Orange. He was drunk, and it followed on. His wife was raped, and they lost a child. So that book is like just pain, max pain. I've got another interesting little factoid here. So even though he didn't read the script, King's script, he still had questions for Stephen King.
Right.
So a now legendary story that King reportedly still tells at some of his book readings goes like this. Stanley Kubrick called him at 7 a.m. Little segue. I have an old timer friend in New York City who worked on practical effects. He worked on Rosemary's Baby. I may have told this story on the pod before, but he worked on Rosemary's Baby. He worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if you mentioned Kubrick, and this is at a bar that I used to frequent, you mentioned Kubrick, he would just go, I hate him. Hate that guy. He was the worst. Because, of course, Kubrick was in England and would call at 8 a.m. on the button, 5 days a week for months, and would just give you an ear beating about the minutest detail. So I have a personal anecdote that squares with this. Well, in any case, and of course you got to imagine King is probably still in the throes of his alcoholism. I don't know when he sobered up, but Stanley Kubrick called him at 7 a.m. to say that he believed ghost stories were fundamentally optimistic because the existence of ghosts suggests that humans survive past death. When King responded with the question of how hell fit into that picture, Kubrick simply responded, I don't believe in hell.
Well, Kubrick's like, I'm a filmmaker. I don't believe in hell. Hell exists on Earth.
Right.
My life every day. I can attest to that as an actor, certainly. That's funny.
Yeah, didn't we establish in the core episode on Kubrick that he was? He fundamentally at the end he was sort of just a rational materialist. He made these films that sort of explored extraterrestrial life and ghosts and things like that, but in the end, he kind of.
I think he was an avowed atheist.
Yeah.
So yes, right. He was an extremely rational fellow, and yet he was able to turn that into these extremely dramatic and
it's no dismissing
complex.
Of it. It's just interesting that he sort of writes the best ghost story, makes the best ghost story film, and probably doesn't believe in ghosts whatsoever, and I guess you can be he may have very well believed in aliens, but I just find that interesting.
Yeah. I don't think that it did particularly well at the box office. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was enough of a success to be a hit. He made the movie for $19 million and it made $47 million. So
Oh,
Not too
19 million. You can't do anything with 19 million now. That's
At the time,
catering on a
19
film
million
now,
sure
right?
was, for what they were trying to do. It's amazing
Yeah.
but all of those interiors were sets. That wasn't
Mhm.
shot at the actual hotel. I went to that hotel, by the way, the one in Mount Hood, where they
Mm.
shot all the exteriors.
Mhm.
I took a trip to Oregon a number of years ago with my wife, and we drove this windy mountain road, and we played the Shining theme song as we drove it into the
Oh,
mountains,
that's cool. Yeah.
and we came upon the thing, the facade, and in that hotel, none of the interiors are the same. So you walk in, and you're like, as soon as you walk into the hotel, you're like, wait, this isn't the Shining. So you lose all sense of the Shining, but
Right.
the outside is very much like what it looked like in a lot of ways. It's really funny, and but they have like a bar, really cool bar inside the hotel, and they sell like all these drinks named after characters from the movie, and you can get T-shirts and all sorts of paraphernalia that say Overlook Hotel on them in the gift shop
Cool.
at the hotel. But yeah, that place is very eerie from the outside, but all the interiors that he shot it, I think most of them were like built, right? As far as I know, some of them maybe were shot inside another hotel.
I think that's right. I think they were
You guys
built.
know?
I think it was, wasn't it? Well, let me look it up because I want to get it right. But it wasn't it. Isn't there the famous studio outside of London where I think most of it was probably done? Let me
When they
find
built
out.
that topiary maze, didn't they build that from scratch?
That's
That did not
incredible.
exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So the opening scenes of The Shining were shot in Glacier National Park, Montana, USA. Timberline Lodge in Oregon was used for the
Timberline,
exterior
that's the
of,
place. Yeah.
yeah, at Overlook Hotel. The interior scenes of some of the exterior scenes of the hotel took place at Elstree Film Studios in Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire, England, UK. So
Yeah.
it sounds like most of the the interiors were done at these studios. Mhm.
Insane. So insane.
Well, and of course, if you watch 237, there are people who have picked over every single inch of the Overlook to discover that it doesn't make sense. That diagrammatically it doesn't work, and it creates this uncanny sense that is totally subconscious. Nobody's watching the film with a yardstick in their mind, but when he goes into the room with the general manager, who has the little American flag and all sorts of other little bits and bobs on his desk, there's this window that shouldn't be there. This bright sun. It's like in the interior of the hotel. That window it's an impossible window.
Yeah, and also Danny's course on his little tricycle thing doesn't quite work. His big wheel, right? You can't actually do that, sort of.
Right.
It doesn't make sense in space. And yeah, I think that is cool. Like you don't really notice it, but it does, like, it's almost like having like a sub-audible frequency. Like you do pick up on it on some level. Some part of your brain knows something is off. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a little bit unsettling. And then that speaks to the whole labyrinth nature, right? Where the film actually ends up. I mean, the topiary maze is not an accident that's in there
and totally
means.
Invented by Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, that's not right.
Which is amazing.
Exactly.
The craziest thing I love that movie 237. Also, we should note, I think, that 237 doesn't claim that all of these things are true. It just is like, it's the kind of movie that can drive anyone to a psychosis about all of these, trying to find these things, which I think is what Kubrick was trying to do ultimately, which is why it's so cool, because it's like, you're just chasing your tail forever, trying to figure it out. But my favorite thing that movie, that the documentary 237 showed me, that after seeing the movie 100 times, I never noticed, was when Danny and Wendy are watching television in the great room where like Jack is writing his novel, and they're watching a television program. There's no plug. The TV isn't plugged in. They're watching a full-on TV show.
Right.
And there's no plug. And he pans out from the TV. He's showing you there's no plug to that TV. So is the TV haunted? Are they haunted? Are they are they being, I like to think that that's like a moment where the ghosts are distracting them while they're working on Jack. And the idea that like we sort of bury our head in the sands with like what's going on with like our loved ones, our kids. We don't realize the insanity going on around us when we get so invested in stupid shit and like the minutia of life. And like you could just to go off on a quick tangent here, you could relate that to almost as if Kubrick was like, 40 years into the future, movies will be obsolete and everyone will be glued to their TV sets and completely obsessed with unreality on the TV. And that's all that people talk about. Like when you get together with people now, the first thing people talk about is, what are you watching? What are you binging? What's the last show you watched? I mean, no matter who it is, it always comes up within like 2 minutes of conversation. People are like, oh, I just finished this and I'm down one. Oh, did you see the new episode of this? Did you see the new season of this? And I just find it very interesting that, like, you know, there's Wendy and Danny just sitting and staring at this television that is getting its power from nothing. I don't remember what they're watching.
Well, and I pulled it up right now.
Did you?
So
Okay.
I have a little interesting thing. Yeah. So many people have asked about the significance of the number 42 on Danny's T-shirt in the toothbrushing shining scene. And then this is collative learning, some article. This person says, I don't go for number interpretations generally, but here I'll make an exception. In the lobby, Danny and Wendy watch a film called Summer of 42, which is about a young man who has an affair with an older woman. This is right before the fatherly love scene. The number
It just
42
got way creepier.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. The number 42 was shown on Danny's shirt as a parallel with the sexual relationship content of the film Summer of 42, and Danny is wearing it in the early summer scenes of the film. The particular scene from Summer of 42 that we see in the lobby television shows the older woman telling the young man to sit down while she makes lunch for him. Wendy parallels this in her last line of dialogue to Danny as he runs to get his fire engine. Make sure you come right back because I'm going to make lunch soon. The film within a film parallel is also hinted at by the television content initially filling up our entire view of the screen before zooming out to reveal Danny and Wendy in the lobby. The complete lack of wires running to the TV, pointed out by my correspondents, may also be related to the concept of a fractal film. These observations could easily be interpreted as evidence that Wendy has also had an incestuous relationship with Danny, but my guess is the older woman relationship refers to the woman in room 237, who we know is simply a dream manifestation of Jack. Okay.
Wait, but doesn't explain why there's no power to the television.
Right.
It doesn't.
No.
No.
I watched that. Yeah, I mean, I think at that point, I think it relates to the whole Oedipal. I know that Kubrick was obsessed with Freud and the Oedipal complex, and it's all throughout his movies, all that shit, his weird relationship to women and sex. You can see it in everything from Clockwork Orange to Full Metal Jacket to Eyes Wide Shut, like every single movie, even Barry Lyndon, which, by the way, is fucking incredible. I saw Barry Lyndon, by the way, on a big screen in New York about 4 years ago.
I love Barry Lyndon.
Wow.
If anyone gets a chance to see that movie does not, you can't see that movie the way it's meant to be unless you see it on a big screen. The only way to see that movie is on a big screen, and it'll totally change your mind about him as a filmmaker, what the best Kubrick movie is. I walked out of that movie thinking that was my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie after seeing it on the big screen. No, it's still The Shining, but I think that's, you know, Kubrick had a demented relationship to women and sex in general, and it's yeah.
Isn't there a theory about this whole incest theme coming up again in the film when Jack is reading a Playgirl in the hotel lobby, and it's a Playgirl that has an article about incest in it? Because
I seem to recall that. Yes.
Yeah. So there's definitely something, and that's just a bizarre. That's not something that I caught when I watched the film. I think in my head he's just reading a magazine while he waits, and yeah, it turns out he's just sitting in the hotel lobby reading a Playgirl. All things.
Weird.
Yeah.
So much detail and so interesting.
But there is, I do like this idea that because I had thought before, like, okay, does the film work if you take out some of these details? There's a whole theory about how the film's really about like the westward expansion and the decimation of indigenous populations, right? There's like all these, and they're supported by these tiny little details. And does the film kind of work if you take them all out? In a sense, it probably does, but I do like, it's a very writerly film in that obsession, that obsessiveness, like it kind of goes all the way down, right? And Jack, being a writer trying to write this great work, is also going to be similarly obsessed with details until he, in this case, his mind breaks, right? I mean, there's also supernatural forces at work, but that from that perspective, it's like it's a great novel. It's a great film about trying to write a novel. Like, and it works on all levels. It's not just about a guy writing a book. It's about like the psychological process of trying to write a book.
It's also about a dry drunk. He doesn't have any access to liquor, but it doesn't matter. He's already it's like he's already sold his soul. He's ready to sell his soul. And it's this iconic scene at the bar in the gold room. And people talk about that too. You talk to some old time AA people, they'll tell you, like, you can be an alcoholic and not do the work, and your life won't get all the way better, because it's a way of being as much as it is an addiction, which is one of the reasons it's so tricky to beat.
Sure. Yeah.
But don't you think a lot of that stuff too, I think, and I think that's definitely in there, and that's definitely in the novel. I think Kubrick, in like all his movies, and I think especially in The Shining, he has these, like, it's all about the journey of man. Like, that's his whole sort of like, and I know he talks about this a bit, but like the journey of man, you see it in it's literal in 2001.
Yeah, right.
Even in his movies before then, in terms of like the movies he made about war, the film noir stuff that he made, even Spartacus. But it's like, it's usually like, and it's not the hero's journey. It's like the journey of the evolution of man, and like trying to figure out like what it means to be a man in any society you're living in, or any time period. So it's like the future, an alternate future, the present, the past, the recent past. And it's like, if you look at Keir Delay in 2001 and what he goes through at the end, you look at Malcolm McDowell, you look at Matthew Modine in Full Metal Jacket, where he, his Matthew Modine's character from start to finish goes on quite a journey, and, sees a level of, and I think that what it is like every single one of those characters ends up seeing a level of deceit, degradation, like shittiness about human beings, and yet at the end is still standing. Even in The Shining's case, he's frozen in place, but he's still there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But it's like it constantly feels like in these movies, and especially The Shining, he's just grappling with what it means to be human in this skin bag that we live in, and like not being able to leave the body behind and think about what those spiritual connections are, what those energy connections are, and how they kind of translate to existence. The whole idea of like perception is reality, and our own living inside our own heads, and the reality that it exists for us is not actually reality, because time is circular, etc., etc. I'm not high at all, by the way.
No.
The best way to see The Shining, although the best way to see The Shining is high. I will admit that when I was watching it at my parents' house, I had smoked a joint and was sitting in their living room, and I was high as a fucking kite. And then they came in and were like, "Can we watch this with you?" And I was like,
"Right,
it'll be interesting."
Yeah.
And they were stone cold sober and still loved it, so you can enjoy that. But
well, this is
by the way,
this is the place you get into when you're talking about a Kubrick film. Anyway, it does sound like
you don't have to be high. Yeah, it makes you seem high. I will say on that note, in college, we got very into the whole experimentation of watching movies with alternate soundtracks. Once the Wizard of Oz thing came out, Dark Side, we did watch 2 Kubrick movies synced to the Pink Floyd album Metal, because they say that you can sync Metal. I don't know if you can look this up. You can sync Metal to 2001, and you can sync Metal to The Shining. Man, is it cool! I highly recommend. I don't know where the needle drop is.
Sure.
Wizard of Oz, it's like the third roar of the lion is what you spread track one.
Right. Yeah.
But for Metal, I don't know what you can look it up, but I do remember that being a cool experience.
Huh.
I had never heard of that. That's why you keep coming back to Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com. Well, we're going to cut to a quick break, but then for Patreon, come back and we're going to talk about that creepy final scene in Eyes Wide Shut. We're going to talk a little bit about Tarantino and his perception of Kubrick.
Oh, and for the Patrons, they get to see my little knickknack that I brought.
Oh,
right. There's
a knickknack reveal.
A knickknack reveal. And we'll talk about the on-set drama in the making of The Shining. I have a something I kind of want to end on here for the core, but for this main episode, before I do, Michael, you want to tell people where they can find you one more time? Tell them about your pod.
Yeah, so you can find Playing Dead on all major platforms, Apple, Spotify, all those places. I think what do? You just type in my name or type in Playing Dead and you'll find it. You can find me on Instagram, M_Nathanson1. Oh no, I reversed it. That's my Twitter handle. Who knows how many Michael Nathansons there were, but apparently there are a lot. I'm Michael_Nathanson on the gram and on Twitter, which I feel like I may be leaving shortly. I'm just had it with that fucking dude. And
that bird website is a lot.
Today I was like, the banning of the journalist was kind of the last straw for me. But for the moment,
it's only temporary. But yeah.
No. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, M_Nathanson1. And yeah, please listen to the podcast. Rate it 5 stars if you love it. If you don't love it, rate it. Don't just leave and don't say anything.
Right. Right. You don't have to leave a snarky review.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And luckily, that's not happened yet. But I
it'll
think
come.
I'm sure we have about 4 episodes left, and then we're going to do a bonus episode, which was live from LA Comic-Con with Keith David, which is very exciting. But yeah, there's something for everybody in all those podcasts. So tune in. I'm sure there's some bit of fandom that will excite you.
For sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, let me close out with this one final interesting fact, and then we'll cut to the After Dark. So this is about the post-release edit from The Shining. After its premiere and a week into the general run with a running time of 146 minutes, Kubrick cut a scene at the end that took place in a hospital. The scene shows Wendy in a bed talking with Mr. Ullman, who explains that Jack's body could not be found. He then gives Danny a yellow tennis ball, presumably the same one that Jack was throwing around the hotel. The scene was subsequently physically cut out of prints by projectionists and sent back to the studio by order of Warner Brothers. This cut the film's running time to 144 minutes. And this is Roger Ebert saying, if Jack did indeed freeze to death in the labyrinth, of course his body was found, and sooner rather than later, since Dick Halloran alerted the forest rangers to serious trouble at the hotel. If Jack's body was not found, what happened to it? Was it never there? Was it absorbed into the past? And does that explain Jack's presence in that final photograph of a group of hotel partygoers in 1921? Did Jack's violent pursuit of his wife and child exist entirely in Wendy's imagination, or Danny's, or theirs? Kubrick was wise to remove that epilogue. It pulled one rug too many out from under the story. At some level, it was necessary for us to believe the 3 members of the Torrance family are actually residents in the hotel during the winter, whatever happens or whatever they think happens. So,
well, but by the way, they talk about it in the movie that, like, this just keeps happening. Like, obviously, whoever is left there as the caretaker is going insane and killing. So it's about
it's like a role the caretaker passed the play.
So they're all real. In my opinion, they're all real people. It calls to people, and I think what it does is, like all haunted places and all and a lot of horror movies, like, you feel that the characters are drawn there for some reason, right? Like those, and it preys upon weakness, and that's the other thing. It's like horror characters and everything, like especially like that movie It Follows, which is, by the way, for my money, best modern horror movie of the last 20, 30 years.
It's very good.
Love it to death. But that movie too, it like preys upon bad choices, bad decisions, weakness. But I think that's where it comes from. But yeah, I'm so glad that scene doesn't exist. Has anyone ever seen that scene? Is it like available?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know if it's available digitally, but yeah, I mean, it went into the theatrical run and he had it cut physically. They got the call. The projectionist had to make this cut. Very Kubrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ebert's point that it pulls one too many rugs is kind of good. Like, I mean, whatever. I guess if it would have been in there, we would have sort of sorted it out. But like, it does feel like the film ends at this right note of uncertainty. And then you do that one and it's like, well, now I don't know where to stand when I'm trying to think about this film. Yeah, I think it's probably better without it.
Good move, Stan.
Yeah.
Yeah, good move, Stanley. All right.
It meets my approval.
Yeah, so, I approve. Yeah, he passes muster. Michael, thanks again for coming on. Let's talk for another 20, 30 minutes on the After Dark. Michael Nathanson, an actor, writer, producer, Playing Dead podcast. Axe drop.
Thanks, guys. This is super fun.
Thanks,